Welcome to our deep dive into all things Elon Musk. We've got like a mountain of sources, interviews, speeches, even some documentaries, and we're going to see what we can figure out about this guy.
Yeah, what we're really trying to do is figure out, not just what he does, but what's the kind of the engine behind it all. Like, what are his core beliefs, his methods, and, what are the implications of that for the future?
Right, yeah.
It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. One thing that really jumped out at me was his almost mythical work ethic. Especially in those early days at his companies. Like, you hear these stories about him sleeping in the factory and stuff.
Yeah, showering at the YMCA. I mean, this is like a level of commitment that borders on obsession, right? And it wasn't just for like a couple weeks. I mean, this was like years, all-nighters, working 7 days a week. It's like the man exists on a different plane of existence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it all sounds inhuman, but I mean, he believes, 100-hour work weeks, you get twice as much done as 50-hour work weeks.
Yeah. Well, and he even like compares it to having a child. Like, you can't just stop providing for it. It requires, even if it means personal sacrifice, you've got to keep going.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
But is that sustainable? Like, is that, I mean, in the long run, and I wonder, what about the people around him? It's interesting, but is it, kind of a cautionary tale? Or is this the new model for success?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, like, is this going to be something that people try to emulate?
Right.
But let's move on a little bit to how this kind of intensity translates into his problem solving.
Cool.
And this is where his famous first principles thinking comes in.
Yeah. So he doesn't just kind of accept the status quo.
Yeah.
He like breaks it down to, fundamental truth.
It's almost like, reverse engineering a complex machine.
Right.
You don't look at the finished product. You got to take it apart. You got to understand the core components and how they work together. And, a really good example of this is his approach to, rocket cost.
Yeah.
I mean, instead of just, accepting these outrageous prices, he actually went in and analyzed the cost of the raw materials.
And that's what led to SpaceX manufacturing their own components, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And what he found is that, like, the traditional rocket manufacturing was massively inflated.
Wow.
And so he just thought outside the box and said, well, we can do it better.
Right. So that's an example of going to those first principles, right?
Yeah.
And figuring out, like, how could it actually be done?
Yeah. And what's really cool about this, too, is that, you can apply this to your own life.
Oh, interesting.
Like, so let's say, you want to start a business.
Yeah.
But you're kind of intimidated by the, traditional costs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if instead of focusing on those costs, you analyze the core elements that your business really needs.
Right. Okay.
And build from there.
So stripping away all the assumptions and kind of rebuilding it from the ground up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got this intense work ethic.
Hmm.
We've got the first principles thinking. But Musk isn't just about business.
No.
He also has some pretty interesting ideas about the meaning of life in our future.
Yeah, and I think this is where, the space stuff comes in.
Right.
And what's interesting to me is that, for Musk, becoming a multiplanetary species, it's not just a technological challenge. It's almost a philosophical, necessity.
Oh, wow.
He sees it as an insurance policy almost.
Right.
For humanity, right? Against all the things that could go wrong.
Right. So it's not just about escaping the problems on Earth, but like literally long-term survival of the species.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's about, having something to strive for. I mean, he talks about, the world being full of miserable problems and the need for, a future that inspires like a Mars colonization thing.
Exactly. It's like, okay, yeah, there are problems here on Earth.
Yeah.
But look at all these amazing things that are out there. Let's get excited about exploring the cosmos.
Right. So instead of just, focusing on all the things that are going wrong, he's like, hey, there's a whole universe out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. But when you're talking about these, grand ambitions and, pushing the boundaries of technology, there's inherent risk involved.
There is.
So how does Musk deal with that?
Well, I mean, he's a big believer in taking risks, especially when you're young.
Yeah.
And, you don't have, like family obligations and things like that. He encourages people to, really go for it in those early years, even if it means failing.
And he even says something like, if you're not adding things back in, you're not deleting enough.
Yeah, that's true.
Which kind of suggests that, like, you really got to push it to the edge.
Absolutely. And I think that, that brings us to this idea of the corrective feedback loop, which is basically, learning from your mistakes
Yeah.
and refining your approach as you go. I mean, think about, 2008 when he almost went bankrupt.
Oh, yeah.
Tesla, SpaceX, both on the verge of collapse.
Right. Yeah.
And, he could have just, given up at that point, but instead he used it as a learning experience.
Like a crucible.
Yeah, exactly. And he came out of it, stronger and more informed. I mean, he really seems to embrace those failures as like, stepping stones.
Yeah. So take risks, embrace failure. It's all part of the process.
Absolutely.
Right. But, no matter how brilliant you are, you can't do it all alone.
No, you need a team.
You need a team, right?
Right.
So how does Musk, attract and manage the talent to actually make all this crazy stuff happen?
Well, he believes that a company is only as good as its people.
Right.
So he places a huge emphasis on, finding the best and the brightest.
So it's not just about, their skills, but also about their passion.
Yeah.
Are they bought into the mission?
Absolutely. They got to be on board with the vision.
Right.
And then once you have that team, the next step is focus. And he talks about this idea of signal over noise.
Which is like cutting through the distractions.
Yeah.
Just focusing on what really matters.
Exactly.
Right. And this reminds me of Tesla's decision to just skip traditional advertising altogether.
Yeah.
And just pour all their resources into R&D.
Yeah, they're basically saying, look, our product speaks for itself.
Right.
We don't need to, do all this marketing hype.
Okay. So we've got this work ethic, the problem-solving approach, a big vision for humanity, a willingness to embrace risk, and then this laser focus on talent and tuning out the noise.
Yeah. I mean, does that kind of capture the essence of Musk's approach?
I think it does. I mean, it's a lot to take in, but
He is.
but it's pretty fascinating. But I think there's another piece of this story. We can't ignore the controversies.
We can't, and, to really get the full picture of this guy, we have to look at the criticisms as well.
Right. Yeah.
And there are plenty of those.
There are, yeah. And I think we need to, dive into those a little bit more, to get a more complete understanding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because there are some serious questions that have been raised.
Yeah. And we'll do that in the next part of our deep dive. So
Yeah.
stay tuned for that.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So we've kind of established that, Elon Musk is this force of nature driven by this, crazy ambition and this really unique problem-solving approach. But, as we said, there's another side to this story.
Absolutely, there are controversies.
Yeah.
And, to really grasp the complexity of this guy, we got to look at those criticisms.
Right. Yeah. And I guess, one of the biggest ones is the accusations of labor exploitation at the Tesla factories.
Yeah.
There have been all these reports about like the working conditions, the pressure to meet deadlines, and, even trying to prevent unions from forming.
Yeah, and that, that really clashes with the image that he tries to project, right? This idea that he's like this progressive leader who really cares about his employees.
Right.
So you got to wonder, like, is there this gap between the vision and the reality? And what's the human cost of all this, progress and innovation?
Right. And then, there's the whole autopilot thing.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like every week there's a new story about some accident involving a Tesla on autopilot.
And I think, a lot of people are wondering if the technology is just being rolled out too fast.
Yeah.
Like, are there enough safety measures in place? Has it been tested thoroughly enough?
Yeah. And the critics are saying, look, this rush to get the technology out there is putting lives at risk.
And, they point to these instances where the system has, failed to detect obstacles, or it's made, weird maneuvers.
Yeah.
Leading to, some pretty bad accidents. And I think, those incidents raise some really valid questions about, where do we draw the line between innovation and safety?
Right. I mean, yes, self-driving technology is amazing, but how do we make sure it's safe for everyone?
Exactly.
Yeah. And, Musk's response to all this is that, well, statistically, autopilot is safer than human drivers. And he kind of blames a lot of these accidents on driver error, people not using the system correctly.
But I mean, how much responsibility does Tesla have to make sure their technology is foolproof?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a really complicated issue, and there's no easy answers, but it's definitely something that we need to think about carefully.
Absolutely. I mean, how do we ensure that the pursuit of innovation doesn't end up, compromising people's well-being?
Right. And it kind of brings up this bigger question about, just the pace of technological advancement in general.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, are we moving too fast?
Right.
Are we thinking through all the implications?
Okay. Well, Um, Maybe shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about the criticisms about Musk's wealth and, this whole idea that he's this self-made billionaire.
Yeah. And while his, entrepreneurial journey is obviously impressive, some people argue that, a lot of his success is due to, privilege and government support. They point to like his upbringing, right? I mean, he came from a wealthy family, and then there's the billions of dollars in government loans and tax breaks that his companies have gotten.
So basically they're saying that the self-made thing is a myth, that he had a lot of advantages that most people don't.
Right. And I think it challenges that traditional rags to riches story.
Right.
And it reminds us that success is often influenced by, things that are bigger than just individual effort.
So yeah, it's not to take away from his accomplishments, but just to acknowledge that, not everyone starts at the same starting line.
Right. It's about understanding the broader context.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, despite all these controversies,
Mhm.
he remains this really captivating figure, right? Like, he's a brilliant engineer, he's a visionary leader, and he's really good at getting attention.
He's a master of, generating hype and excitement.
Yeah,
People are drawn to that.
right. I mean, you can't deny that.
No, I mean, he's got this charisma and this ability to inspire people. They buy into his bold ideas and, this willingness to kind of shake things up.
Yeah, so he's created this almost cult of personality.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? All these people who are just, like, totally devoted to his vision.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you got to be careful with that kind of devotion to any leader.
Yeah. A healthy dose of skepticism is always a good thing.
Right. I mean, blind faith can be dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. No matter how much you admire someone, you gotta hold them accountable.
Right. Okay, so maybe let's move on to something a little bit more concrete. And talk about his 5-step improvement process.
Okay, yeah.
It's like this framework that he uses to, constantly refine his ideas and processes.
Yeah, it's a really interesting glimpse into, his approach to problem solving. And, the first step might surprise you. It's about questioning the requirements.
So even if those requirements come from experts,
Mhm.
he's like, don't just take it for granted.
Yeah, because he believes that everyone makes mistakes.
Okay.
And that includes the people who are, setting the parameters for a project. So he encourages his teams to push back, to challenge assumptions.
So, like, don't just follow the recipe,
Yeah.
understand the ingredients and, like, experiment.
Exactly.
Right.
And then step 2 is deletion. Get rid of anything that's not absolutely essential.
Right. Which goes back to that whole, streamlining, simplifying thing.
Yeah, exactly.
He famously said, if you're not adding things back in, you're not deleting enough.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Which I guess suggests this constant process of evaluation and refinement.
Absolutely.
Okay, so once you've, questioned the requirements and you've deleted all the unnecessary stuff, then what?
Then you move on to simplification and optimization. So you're basically taking those remaining elements and you're making them as efficient and effective as possible.
So, like, fine-tuning it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then once you've optimized it, step 4 is to accelerate the cycle time.
So do it faster.
Do it faster. Exactly.
And this is where, like, his obsession with speed comes in.
Yeah, he's always pushing the envelope,
Yeah.
trying to move faster and faster, break records.
Yeah, but I mean, doesn't that risk sacrificing quality?
And that's where it's important to note that, he emphasizes accelerating the cycle time only after you've gone through the first 3 steps.
So it's like, get it right first and then worry about speed.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so streamline, optimize, and then
Yeah.
hit the gas. What's the final step?
Automation. So using technology to take over, repetitive tasks,
Yeah,
freeing up humans to do the more creative and strategic stuff.
so working smarter, not harder.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, so this is a pretty powerful framework for continuous improvement, but it's not all about, systems and processes, right?
Yeah.
He also talks a lot about, like, meaning and inspiration when it comes to, motivating his workforce.
Yeah, he understands that people want to be a part of something bigger than themselves.
Right. It's not just about, building cars or rockets. It's about contributing to this, like, larger vision of a sustainable future and, pushing the boundaries of human exploration.
Exactly.
So he's tapping into that, like that human desire to explore and innovate and leave a mark on the world.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And that's maybe one of his greatest strengths, right?
Yeah.
Like his ability to inspire and motivate people.
Definitely.
He's not just building companies, he's building, like, this movement, this tribe of believers who are all in on this, idea of a better future.
Yeah, it's incredibly compelling.
Yeah, yeah. But it also raises some ethical questions.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, where do you draw the line between inspiration and manipulation?
Right.
And I think it's really important to, to look critically at the potential downsides of this kind of charismatic leadership.
Right. But regardless of how you feel about him, you can't deny that he's a major force.
He's a disruptor, an innovator, and a catalyst for change.
And as we move further into the 21st century, his influence is only going to grow.
Yeah.
And I think in the next part of our deep dive, we need to we need to really confront these challenging questions about, worker treatment and the safety concerns and, the ethical implications of all this.
Yeah, to really understand Elon Musk, we have to look at, both the bright spots and the shadows.
Right. Okay, so stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive where we'll tackle all that.
So, we've spent, a good amount of time now exploring all these different sides of Elon Musk, the drive, the innovation, the big vision. But to really get a handle on his impact, we have to look at the more challenging stuff, the controversies, the stuff that's kind of cast a shadow on things.
Right. I mean, you can't just ignore those.
Yeah.
It'd be like, I don't know, admiring a fireworks display, but like not even acknowledging that, there's a potential for burns.
Right. Yeah. You got to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So let's start with these accusations about worker mistreatment at the Tesla factories. All these reports about the conditions, the pressure to meet those production goals, and even, trying to stop unions.
It's a bit of a contrast, right,
Yeah.
to the image that he likes to project. Like,
Yeah.
Being this progressive leader who's, focused on his employees, it suggests there might be a disconnect there, right? Right, between the vision and then what's actually happening.
And you have to wonder about the human cost of all this, this drive for progress and innovation.
Yeah. And then there's that whole autopilot debate.
Oh, yeah.
Like it seems like every other week there's another story of an accident.
Yeah. And the question is it being rolled out too fast? Is it ready? Are there, are the safety measures in place? Has it been tested rigorously enough?
Right. And the critics are saying, look, you're putting lives at risk with this rush to get the tech out there.
Yeah, and they point to these cases where autopilot has failed, like not detecting obstacles or making sudden movements, and people get hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those incidents really raise those questions about, like, where's the line between, the benefit of the new technology and safety?
Right. How do you make sure it's actually safe for everyone?
Right. And Musk's response is, well, statistically, autopilot is safer than humans.
Right.
And it's driver error.
But, whose responsibility is it to make sure that the technology is, like, foolproof?
Right.
I mean, it's tricky.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue. And I don't know if there are any easy answers, but it's definitely something that we need to consider really carefully.
Absolutely. It kind of raises that question of, how do we make sure that this pursuit of all this cool new stuff doesn't end up hurting people?
Yeah. And it makes you think about, like, just technology in general.
Mm-hmm.
Are we moving too fast? Are we really thinking through all the implications of this?
Yeah, good point.
Okay, so let's maybe shift gears a little bit. And, we talked before about those criticisms about Musk's wealth.
Yeah.
This idea of the self-made billionaire.
Right. And while his journey is definitely impressive, you can't argue with that. Some people say, well, he had some help along the way.
Yeah?
They talk about his background, coming from a wealthy family, government loans, tax breaks.
Yeah. And they're saying, look, this self-made narrative, it's kind of a myth.
Yeah. It's not quite the whole story.
Right. Because he had all these advantages that most people don't have.
Right. It kind of challenges that, that whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps idea.
Right. So it's not to, diminish what he's done, but just to say that, well, maybe not everybody has the same opportunities.
Yeah. Just acknowledge that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, we've talked about the good, the bad, the ugly, but he's still this, like, captivating figure.
For sure. I mean, he's brilliant. He's a visionary. He's, and he knows how to get attention.
Yeah. He knows how to play the game.
He creates this hype.
Right.
And people love it.
Yeah. You can't deny that.
No. He's got that charisma, and people buy into his ideas. They like that he's willing to, shake things up.
Yeah, he's a disruptor. So he's almost created this cult of personality around himself.
Yeah. It's a loyal following.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, is that a good thing?
I mean, you have to be careful with that kind of devotion to, any leader.
Right. It's easy to just get swept up in it.
Yeah, a little skepticism is always good.
Blind faith can be dangerous.
Absolutely. You gotta hold people accountable, even if you admire them.
Right, right. Okay. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the heights of his ambition, the controversies, the complexities, and everything in between.
We've been on quite a journey.
Yeah. So I guess, what are your final thoughts on this guy, this Elon Musk?
I think, he's kind of a mirror in a way. He
Definitely.
reflects our hopes and our anxieties about the future. He embodies that potential, but also the risks and the ethical questions that come with it.
Yeah. Like we were saying, technology is moving fast.
Mhm.
And are we really prepared for it?
Right. And I think that's on all of us
Yeah.
as individuals and as a society to, really grapple with these things and decide what kind of future we want.
So it can't just be passive.
No, we have to be engaged.
Right.
Have these conversations. Ask the hard questions. Hold people accountable. Because the future is not just something that happens, We're
Yeah.
creating it with our choices.
That's a great point.
And I think maybe that's, one of the biggest takeaways from all this.
Yeah.
To be bold, to think big, embrace those new ideas, but never stop questioning.
Right. Don't just accept things blindly.
Exactly.
Well, that's a great note to end on. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Elon Musk. I hope you learned something, maybe you had some debates, and, came away with even more questions.
Yeah, I always say more questions is a good thing.
It means you're thinking.
It means you're thinking. Exactly.
All right. Well, until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and, keep pushing those boundaries.
Good advice.
All right.